Mark Few is showered with praise by some of the greatest college and NBA coaches of all time. What does coaching with Team USA mean for his legacy?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Wednesday. Welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by Game Time. Folks, download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Well, thrilled to be joined today by Theo Lawson. Theo writes at the Spokesman-Review, covering all sorts of stuff on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Did a great article about Mark Few. We're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about the WCC schedule coming out, what that means for Theo and his travel schedule, what that means for the Zags, some interesting things on that schedule. We're going to close out, talk about some summer league stuff. Theo was in the building in Las Vegas, watched a lot of our former Zags get a chance to play out there. So we're going to talk about that as well. But Theo, I want to start with the Olympic side of things, and specifically the Mark Few side of things. I know you had an opportunity while you were in Vegas to not only go to summer league games and check out Anton Watson and Killian, Tillie, and Julian Strawther and Timme, but got an opportunity to see Team USA in practices, and of course Mark Few as an assistant coach down there. And article came out a little over a week now, I think, as we're recording this here on Tuesday. And I loved the article because it was interviews with a handful of fantastic people in this industry, coaches who are on that staff, some coaches who were just there watching the practices and hearing what they had to say about Mark Few. And so I want to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about the experience of talking to Jim Boeheim and Matt Painter and Erik Spoelstra and everybody that you got a chance to speak to, and kind of what it meant for you to kind of hear how these legends in NBA and college coaching spoke about Gonzaga's Mark Few.
Yeah, so I was down there for about 4 to 5 days, just covering the USA training camp and then the exhibition game against Canada that was at T-Mobile Arena before the U.S. team went off to Abu Dhabi to kind of continue their preseason tour. I didn't really go in with this idea of let's see how many people I can talk to about Mark Few, and wasn't sure what the access would be like, how many of these people were going to be around training camp. But eventually, after talking to a couple of them, I was kind of deciding, I think it would be neat to see how many of these people, these kind of USA basketball, whether they're assistant coaches or Grant Hill, the directing general manager of USA basketball, former coaches like Jim Boeheim, PJ Carlesimo, Matt Painter, who works with the select team right now. How many of these people I can talk to about Mark Few. And I think it's interesting because, we're kind of in our Gonzaga bubble up here, and we speak to people around the college game about Mark all the time and ask opposing coaches after these, these marquee non-conference games about Mark, and ask people in the Gonzaga universe about him. But I think once you kind of step outside of that college Gonzaga bubble, you realize how revered he is, really internationally, nationally, whatever you want to call it, by people at the highest level of the game. I think if you think about who the top 3-4 coaches in the NBA are, you have to mention Steve Kerr, Erik Spoelstra, Ty Lue, and they all gave glowing reviews of Mark Few. Obviously, he's on that USA staff for a reason. Yeah. He's been involved with USA basketball for a long time, and so he's just kind of steadily climbed that ladder. He started as kind of a court coach for some of the age group teams, and kind of just kept working his way up the ladder. Now obviously at the highest level of that totem pole, I guess, aside from being the head coach of the Olympic team. So there's definitely a reason he's on that staff. They really like someone who has a different perspective. They always try to keep a college coach on that staff because I think they find that person can see the game a little bit differently than the NBA coaches. For example, the last practice I went to, they had Mark Few installing zone defense because he sees it more in the college game than Spoelstra, Lue, and Steve Kerr do in the NBA game. So he was there installing the zone defense. He had Jim Boeheim there watching on. Jim Boeheim, obviously, kind of the architect of the one of the architects of the 2-3 zone that he used for about 80 years at Syracuse. So Jim Boeheim was pretty funny the next day when I talked to him, kind of critiquing Mark Few about installing the zone a little bit. And I taught him everything he knows. But really fun just to kind of talk to some of these kind of higher up people within USA basketball, NBA legends, Grant Hill, NBA former All-Star. So they all kind of say the same things about Mark, but is always positive, and kind of just shows how widely appreciated he is outside of this kind of Gonzaga bubble that we live in.
And I think that's like what stands out to me is when you can look at criticism and where it comes from versus praise and where it comes from. And in this situation, like, we hear criticism for Mark Few, and sometimes it's legitimate. He's not impervious to being criticized. I've done it, like other people have done it, and sometimes it's justified. But the people who want to discredit Mark Few, who want to say, like, there's always a subset of every fan base that just doesn't like the current head coach. That's just a part of sports fandom. But then you have, people on social media who maybe pretend they're college basketball fans, who are often college football fans who don't tune into basketball until March, who are critical of him, or how come he hasn't won the big one or whatever. And yet when you talk to people who are at again, like you said, the pinnacle of this sport, people who have coached at the Division I level for 120 years, like Jim Boeheim or PJ Carlesimo, who took Seton Hall to the Final Four, or NBA coaches, legends like Steve Kerr and Erik Spoelstra and folks like that. And they all have like nothing but incredibly nice things to say. And it's legitimate. It feels, you can feel this like reverence, or just like this belief and respect and in who he is and what he's accomplished. And I think part of it is maybe a lack of ability to recognize how unique what Mark Few has done at a school like Gonzaga is. And I think part of that is the longer that this goes on, I almost think it has like kind of an adverse effect. I was kind of thinking about this after reading the article. Is like, every player in college basketball right now has been alive for the entirety of Gonzaga's. Like they've never been alive in a time where Gonzaga didn't make the NCAA tournament. And that blows my mind. Like the oldest players in college basketball are 25, 26. That's when Gonzaga started making the tournament. Like, so you have this group of not just players, but fans and people who are out of college who've never lived without Gonzaga making the tournament. So I almost think people kind of look at Gonzaga the way you look at a Kansas or a Kentucky or a Duke, and see like, well, those teams win championships. Why can't Mark Few? And it's like, he's at a school that I don't want to say nothing, but was not anywhere close to this caliber. And he took them to this level and has maintained it. Nobody else has ever done that. Like Jim Boeheim, Syracuse was nothing when he started, and then they got great, but they moved into a power conference. Butler moved into a power conference after they had some success, 10, 15 years ago or whatever. Like, Gonzaga's done it without moving into a power conference. And I think you can see the way these coaches, respect him for being able to accomplish what he's accomplished. And I think there's maybe this subset of people who struggle to recognize that. And the farther away we get from the time period where Gonzaga was just another mid-major program, like, because we're so far removed from that now, it almost had, like I said, it has like kind of feel like it has an adverse effect where people are less likely to recognize Mark Few's greatness.
Yeah, I think, I think the one conversation I had down there in Vegas that really kind of, showed how much they appreciate him and kind of recognize what he's done. Maybe Steve Kerr, maybe Ty Lue and Grant Hill don't have the same perspective because maybe they didn't follow Gonzaga when Gonzaga was mid-major back in the 1990s. But talking to Erik Spoelstra, he was a guard at the University of Portland during, I believe it was Gonzaga's last losing season. So shows you how long ago that was. Erik Spoelstra is a fixture in the coaching world, and he's been doing this for a long time. So the last time Gonzaga had a losing season and weren't honestly very good at all was Spoelstra's, I believe, sophomore season at Portland. They played Gonzaga toward the end of the year. Mark Few was a grad assistant on Dan Fitzgerald's staff, and so he really had the perspective of I've seen Gonzaga from the mid-major that couldn't string together a winning season to a college basketball powerhouse. And so I think talking to people like that really kind of enlightened me on how much they appreciate what he's done and recognize it, and just also recognize how hard it is to do what he's done. Another anecdote from that story was a conversation that Jim Boeheim had in a casino in Vegas, I think a day before the USA basketball showcase against Canada. Some woman tracked him down at the casino and said, "Oh, are you from Syracuse?" And he's like, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm from Spokane." And Boeheim was like, you guys have got a great coach there. And she says, "Great coach. He hasn't won the big game yet." And again, like, kind of goes back to what you were saying is if that's the only thing that Mark Few hasn't done at Gonzaga, then I think it's almost more of a compliment to him than anything else. And of course, Jim Boeheim being the personality that he is, and kind of with the temper that he's known to have, just went off on this lady and used a bunch of swear words that I couldn't use in my story. Just really let her have it for about a minute and said, you need to kind of appreciate him. He's he's one of the best coaches in this industry, and you guys should be fortunate. But and talking to Coach Carlesimo, he kind of said the same thing that you were saying is, once you get to that certain level, people expect more, and it almost becomes, it almost does have that adverse effect where you're kind of a victim of your own success. And that's a good place to be, because it would, it's a lot better to be that than the exact opposite, and trying to win, trying to get to 500 for the first time in 10 years, or anything else. But it just kind of shows what he's done, demonstrates how impressive of a job it is that he's managed this at a small school like Gonzaga. And I think reaffirms what people need to appreciate every season, whether it ends in the Sweet 16. If it's a 1 seed that loses in the Sweet 16, it's still impressive. If it's a 4 seed that makes it to the Final Four, it's still impressive. And I think people take it for granted, and I think there's a certain section of fans who don't, of course, but it's more or less the people who tune in late in the year and see Gonzaga lose in a championship game. Oh, they can't win the big games. Like, well, they were never supposed to be in the big game. So go back there and kind of lower your expectations and realize that this is still a pretty incredible accomplishment and kind of the overall scheme of college sports.
Well, we kind of talked a little bit about the WCC. Want to get more into that because their conference schedule was released on Tuesday. We know the Zags are opening on the road. We know they're not closing with St. Mary's, which is typically what we're used to. So we're going to talk about why that might be, what is a little different about this schedule, and what's a little bit the same. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, let's talk about game time, because minor league baseball season is fully underway, and I live about 10 minutes away from the Hillsboro Hop Stadium. I love being able to make a last-minute decision to head out to the ballpark, and that's why I use Game Time, because prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. So with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And as somebody who's concerned maybe my tickets aren't going to be real if I'm buying them from a third-party app, Game Time has their ticketing coverage is the most flexible customer service policy in the entire ticketing industry. And personally, I love having that peace of mind. So folks, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app now, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. 2 tickets, Hillsboro Hops, $30. You can get them for $10 if you create an account now and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last-minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, folks, segment 2 here. Still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, still joined by the great Theo Lawson of the Spokesman-Review. And we talked about a great article last week about Mark Few and his work with Team USA and some fantastic quotes from some legendary coaches there, but also want to talk about the actual news that broke here this week about Gonzaga and their WCC conference schedule. We don't have game times, but we do have dates for the games. We know Gonzaga's travel schedule in conference play. They're still finalizing the non-conference schedule. We did get an update about Arizona State being on that schedule. We'll talk more about that on Thursday's episode. But Theo, the first thing that I saw on the schedule was one of the first things that I saw you post about on social media, which is that their first game is on the road. They're playing at Pepperdine December 30th. And my first thought was, do I have the date of the UCLA game wrong? Because the UCLA game is like right before that. It's the 28th. And I was like, that is a really quick turnaround. But then I was like, okay, well, I guess it makes sense that they would be playing in Malibu at Firestone Fieldhouse if they're going to be playing at the Intuit Dome. So it feels like that was kind of maybe not a gift for Gonzaga, but like something that they may have coordinated with the WCC to like, hey, if we want to start conference play before January, we got this late game with UCLA. Let's see if we can make this a whole road trip. And it seems like it's going to work out pretty conveniently for the Zags.
Yeah, actually, my first thought was looking at that December 30th game and then seeing I totally forgot about the UCLA game 2 days earlier, and then seeing that January 4th game at LMU, but then that Portland game at home between those two games. And I was like, why are we going to Pepperdine on the 30th, coming back to Spokane, going back to LA on the 4th? But then, of course, remember the UCLA game on the 28th, and I'm sure that was some kind of coordinated effort between the conference and Gonzaga to try to keep the Zags down there to open their conference slate a couple days later against Pepperdine. And I think it really kind of allows Gonzaga to focus on that December 28th game. Not that you can take any conference game lightly, but this is going to be a Pepperdine team rebuilding with a new coach, almost completely new roster. So I think you feel a little bit better about seeing Pepperdine on December 30th and St. Mary's on the road.
Yeah, or even LMU or a lot of the other teams that you might, in theory, face in that situation. But You mentioned the other thing that I want to talk about, which was like the kind of pinball, it seems like, with Gonzaga's schedule. And obviously there's no consecutive road games for Gonzaga until the last two games of the season. They're at Santa Clara on the 27th of February. They're at San Francisco on the 1st of March. That is the first time they play two consecutive road games. I suppose that could be viewed as a good thing for Gonzaga, just in terms of road games being more challenging and not having to play the two of the three, probably, I would say, two of the three roughest road games that you're going to play in conference play in Santa Clara and San Francisco. You don't get them till the end of the season, which, as we saw last year, sometimes you're cooking at the end of the year and you're maybe not cooking at the beginning of the year. So this might be a good thing for Gonzaga. But as somebody who travels with the team or travels to go to the games, like, I can't imagine that it's super fun to have so many different one-off trips to the Bay or one-off trips to Southern California and then coming back. It just feels like it's kind of a wonky setup for the Zags this year.
Yeah, not exactly ideal. I'm not sure the team loves it. I think think in Gonzaga's case, and I think a lot of the teams in this conference are able to charter to games, but there might be a few teams that still have to board a Southwest flight, and doing that, I guess 9 times a year. If you're not playing 2 games at one location during the span of a week, makes it a lot harder. So I think if you are in Gonzaga's position and you do charter to games, and it's generally a pretty easy trip. The farthest you're going to go is probably down to LA, and that's like a 2-hour flight. So it's not too inconvenient. It is a lot of going back and forth between Spokane and these different locations. I don't personally love it, but I think we're past the days of traditional travel partners in college basketball. And there's a lot of kind of weird Wednesday games. I think there's a Monday game. The Pepperdine opener is on Monday, so it's not something that you can really predict as much anymore, and you just kind of have to deal with the punches. And I think in Gonzaga's case, maybe being able to charter, getting to these games pretty quickly and back home pretty quickly makes it a lot easier with class schedules and all that too.
Well, definitely, and I think one of the things that we've seen is for the schedule, obviously, just the addition of 2 new teams, Oregon State and Washington State joining the conference. Obviously, that's going to throw things off a little bit. We've seen that, Gonzaga was pretty consistent with their non-conference or with their conference schedule when BYU was in the mix, and then they leave, and then things kind of had to get shifted around a little bit. And I remember this before saying it. I watched the entire press conference that Mark Few had before he headed out to with Team USA, and he was asked about Washington State and Oregon State joining the conference. And as much as he's going to not hide his feelings about it, like he made it pretty clear that the 2 schools being out of the conference, that the fact that takes away conference games from them is not something that he's happy about. And he said it basically as directly as I think he's going to say it. And then he was asked about Grand Canyon and Seattle U, and he basically said, I haven't even thought about that yet. And I got a really good chuckle out of the way he responded to those 2 things, because I'm not surprised that that's how he feels. I imagine it wasn't a shock to you that that's how he feels about it. But he didn't have any qualms about making it clear that the added conference games, regardless of opponent, is just not something that he wanted for Gonzaga.
Yeah, well, obviously adding 2 more conference games now, bumps into an 18-game conference schedule, so that takes away 2 more non-conference opportunities. And next year, it's kind of hard to imagine that they're going to be able to play an 18-game schedule with 2 more teams in the conference. So you're going to have 13 teams, and it's hard to imagine you're going to still play 18 games and not move up to 20, which again takes away 2 more non-conference opportunities for Gonzaga. Obviously, Gonzaga loves to play. I think right now they're playing up to 8 games against kind of power conference, high level teams. I guess 7 power conference teams, and then maybe San Diego State would be the 8th one. But you also want to have a few non-conference games at home, to where you can play some of these more manageable teams, I guess is the nice way to put it. A lot of teams from the SWAC conference at home, and have your fans be able to come out and watch those games, and still have your heavy dose of games against UConn, Kentucky, and UCLA, teams like that. So I don't know if Mark Few is a big fan of adding teams every other year in this conference. I don't think he's going to be completely honest about it, but I mean, before he left with Team USA, I mean, you got the sense that he wasn't a fan, and I think he was trying to focus on the Olympics and his duties with that team. But you could read between the lines pretty easily, and I'm not sure he voted for 4 more teams to be joining the conference. Of course, we'll see Wazoo and Oregon State stay on board. It doesn't look like that's going to be the case 3 years from now, but at least for the next handful of years, you have at least 2 more teams and 4 more teams for 2025, 26.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we got two new road teams for Gonzaga to face this year. Obviously, in Washington State and Oregon State, they drew a schedule where they play both those 2 new teams twice. So they got 4 new opponents, 2 at home, 2 on the road. And Pullman's not an unfamiliar place. It's not an unfamiliar place for Gonzaga fans. It's not an unfamiliar place for Gonzaga. They used to play there, every other year. So obviously stopped that about a decade ago, in part because Mark Few wanted to use that game for other more marquee non-conference games, which is kind of part of the irony here of this coming back to not work out in his favor anymore. But for you, obviously, you've been to Pullman, you've covered that team, you've been to that arena. But we do get a new road game here in Corvallis for Oregon State. I'm personally very interested in what that game is going to look like. Oregon State's not good; they haven't been good in a while. I don't expect them to be even a top 6 team in the WCC this year, but it's a new road environment for Gonzaga. It's a big arena. We were talking offline about how it's another game in Oregon for, like myself, people who live in Oregon who are Gonzaga fans now get another opportunity to see this team in Corvallis as opposed to just in Portland. And it's a cool opportunity. I think that is a part of this. And when Grand Canyon and Seattle U join, there's obviously huge contingents of Gonzaga fans in Seattle and Phoenix. So I think that's another cool opportunity and not something that gets talked about all that much, but that I think is a fun and important part of this conversation. Is there's going to be a lot of people who don't normally get to see the Zags who get to see them in Corvallis this year and in the future in Seattle or Phoenix or Pullman going forward.
Yeah, I think it's a positive move for almost everyone involved. I imagine we talked about Mark Few maybe not being a big fan of it, but for everyone else, it's for the fans, it's great. It's adding kind of more Northwest rivalries to the conference, at least for the next couple of years. Obviously, WCU and Gonzaga go way back, but it's actually interesting. I had someone reply to me on Twitter this morning and saying that Gonzaga has never beat Oregon State. They're 0-11 against Oregon State. I couldn't believe. I had to go and look that up myself. I went to Gonzaga's record books. Sure enough, that's true. Yeah. Of course, they haven't played since the year I was born, 1991. So it's been a while. And I think Gonzaga will be favored when those teams those 2 teams play twice this year. But again, I think it's a cool opportunity. I've been to Carlesimo once a long time ago when I used to cover WCU basketball in the Pac-12, and it's a unique kind of arena. It's kind of intimate. It's not huge, but it's not small. I think it's going to be a better road atmosphere than a lot of these other WCC venues that Gonzaga plays in. I'm not going to name names, but there's a couple in California that aren't always packed to the brim. But I think and then I think having that rivalry with WCU, whether I'm not sure both sides will agree it's a rivalry right now, but hopefully it can just drum up more excitement in the area. And again, it's going to be a game that draws more buzz than a game against Pacific in the middle of January. So I think it's a positive thing for the program. And WCU, I think will field a pretty competitive team. They only returned one kind of rotation guy from the team that went to the tournament last year, but they bring in a bunch of really good players from Eastern Washington, and we'll have to see kind of how that translates to the WCC. But with a great coach and Dave Riley, I think that's a team that's going to be definitely kind of vying for a top 4 spot in the conference this year. And I think both of those teams are going to be more competitive than a lot of the teams that Gonzaga plays now in the WCC. So I think that also helps with that strength of schedule, KenPom and net, and all those important things that Gonzaga looks at.
If you want to close out the show talking Summer League, because you weren't just in Las Vegas to hang out with Mark Few and again go to Team USA's practices, you also got an opportunity to go see the 4 Zags in action at Summer League. Of course, that'd be Anton Watson and Killian Tillie, who are both playing for the Boston Celtics. Timme playing for the Sacramento Kings. Masquerading is playing for the Toronto Raptors briefly, but played for the Sacramento Kings in Summer League. And then Julian Strawther, who played a couple of very dominant games for the Denver Nuggets. And let's start with the Boston guys, because we have the news with Anton Watson signing that 2-way contract, which is kind of what we expected, hoped would happen for him. Most second-round picks end up getting a 2-way deal. He certainly, at least by my eyes, played well enough to earn that contract, about 12 points, 5 boards. per game for that team in the summer league. And then Killian Tillie, also with Boston. You wrote an article that published a few days ago, kind of talking about Killian Tillie and how long he was without getting a chance to play. I think it was like 850 days that he went with it between playing games. I was surprised to see in that article that he kind of agreed to play for Boston before the draft even happened and before Anton Watson was in the mix. But obviously a really cool opportunity for him. It's unfortunate that it never felt likely that both were going to get signed to two-way contracts. And it kind of felt like Anton was going to kind of take that spot that Tillie could have earned. But obviously he had an opportunity to kind of play in front of everybody at Summer League. And I thought played very well, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity here soon. But very happy for Anton, very happy he's got that contract. He's got his future secure for now, and hopeful that Tillie will find a spot here soon. But I'm sure it was a cool opportunity to see those guys link up together as teammates once again.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting when you think about their careers at Gonzaga overlapped 1 year, and Anton Watson kind of got his first opportunity to really start and play heavy minutes for Gonzaga when Tillie went down with an injury his senior season at Gonzaga. So their college careers are really kind of linked together, even though they only overlapped for 1 year, and they've obviously been in touch ever since. And obviously with Anton being in Spokane the last handful of years, Tillie has actually been living in Spokane. His fiance is from Spokane, played volleyball at Eastern Washington, so he's kind of made Spokane his permanent home. He spends a lot of time, I think, still in France and travels the world, but he's in Spokane, just bought a house. And so I believe those two have played together quite a bit in pickup games at John Stockton's warehouse, things like that over the years. But kind of unique to see them on the same court for the first time in that many years. And their first summer league game, they both started on the bench together, but they actually checked in at the same time. The first possession, I think it was Anton kind of providing some pretty intense on-ball pressure that forced a guy to pass somewhere else, and then Tillie stepped up and then forced a shot clock violation. So it was kind of the two Zags combining on a defensive stop, shot clock violation, their first possession, and then kind of played well together throughout the course of summer league. And both of them were starting by the end of summer league. Obviously, you expect Anton to get a few more opportunities because the team did use a draft pick on him and kind of expected to sign him either to an NBA contract or two-way contract. And so you expected him to get chances, but I think Tillie kind of played well enough that they kept giving him more chances, and he did what he does. He shot the three above 40% and rebounded pretty well, and that's kind of what teams want him to be in the NBA. If he has a chance, he's a knockdown three-point shooter who rebounds well and defends at a pretty high level with his length. So as long as he can stay healthy, he did go 851 days without playing. Was supposed to come back last summer and then had another injury. So that's kind of been the story of his career. But when he's been on the court, he's been really effective and someone who obviously the Memphis Grizzlies liked a lot before the injuries. And I think if he gets another chance in the G League or with the two-way deal, I think he'll make the most of it.
Talk about the kind of role thing, the defined roles. And I think that's an interesting part of the conversation in general, is just like, most guys aren't going to be ball dominant, you give them the basketball, let them go to work kind of players. Like every team has like one guy who has that role, and depending how good that player is, that's typically how good your team is. That's how the NBA works, and everybody else is generally fills some kind of role. And Watson is just tailor-made to be a role player in the NBA, defend well, hit corner threes, you're golden. And Tillie, I think, is somewhat similar. Is like, he's a great three-point shooter. I don't think he's quite as good of an on-ball, like point of attack defender as Watson is, but he's capable, and he's capable of defending around the rim. And you can just see how both those guys are capable role players. And it kind of leads me to the conversation on Julian Strawther here. And then we'll talk Drew Timme as well. But with Strawther, he's a great three-point shooter. He's a capable defensive player. And we saw snippets last year for Denver in his rookie season. That was a really loaded team, particularly on the wing, and he had some injury issues. But what fascinated me about the role that he was given in summer league, and it was only for 2 games, but they kind of gave him the role to be a creator, to like have the ball in his hands and be the person who kind of leads the charge. And he did phenomenally, averaged 20.5 points a game. Again, it was just 2 contests, but the Denver saw what they needed to see. And I'm very intrigued if that is potentially something where Denver's envisioning maybe more of a on-ball kind of almost facilitating role for him, because not only did he not do that in the NBA last year, he didn't really ever do that at Gonzaga either, mostly because of the personnel around him. But I mean, heck, his junior year, Gonzaga could have really used a lead guard type. That was the year where Hickman kind of struggled in that role. And heck, half the year it felt like Drew Timme was kind of playing point guard. And so I'm very interested to see if Julian can kind of take on that role? And I know you got a chance to speak to him, and obviously he loves playing in Las Vegas. That's always been something he's been great at, is his hometown. But I'd love to hear kind of what you got a chance to talk to him about, and what you thought of his performance for those couple games.
Yeah, I mean, he was their guy. He was their go-to scorer, their primary offensive option. In both of the games that I saw, they obviously shut him down after the second game, which is really a compliment to him, because typically teams will only do that with players who just seem like they're above and beyond summer league, and they're almost too good for summer league, and it's more of a risk to keep him out there than playing for the last 3-4 games. So they saw all they needed to see in just 2 games, and he was he was the point guard a lot of the time, which is something that, again, that we're not accustomed to seeing. Watched him at Gonzaga, but I think I'm not sure if that's the role they want him to fill with the Nuggets, but I think that was something that they felt like they could kind of try out at the summer league level, give him the ball a little bit more, let him create. And I think if they need him to do it at the NBA level, he showed he can do it. Obviously, the competition's going to get a little stiffer once he gets to the NBA, but I think either way, he's going to be someone who has a bigger role in the NBA next season, and obviously with I think with Kentavious Caldwell-Pope going to the Magic, I think that opens up a starting spot in their lineup that I think Strawther might be the leading candidate to fill. I think they're kind of looking at him, Christian Brown, Kansas as kind of maybe the 2 primary options to fill that spot. So he's someone who I think gained a lot of confidence playing in summer league, and I had a chance to speak with him about his rookie year, and I think the one thing that stuck out was asking him about his welcome to the NBA moment, and I'll have this in a story down the road, but I think they were playing the Los Angeles Clippers, and most of Denver's kind of starting players were out that game, so he really got an opportunity, and he said on 3 consecutive possessions, Russell Westbrook, Paul George, and Kawhi Leonard called him into isolation, and he had to defend all 3 of those guys one-on-one, 3 straight possessions. So it's like, hey, rookie, we know you can score. You're going to have to defend all 3 of our all-stars on the same 3 consecutive possessions. So that it's always kind of fun to hear their welcome to the NBA moment, the moment they are playing against these guys that maybe they idolize or grew up watching. So it was fun to hear that comment and that story from him. But he obviously embraced his first year. He's fitting in really well there. A lot of the NBA guys at Denver were sitting courtside for the summer league games, and guys like Aaron Gordon were dapping him up halftime of the game, and they really seemed to like him. And he was always kind of that likable guy at Gonzaga that everyone kind of attached themselves to, and it seems like he's really kind of fit into that Denver locker room, and obviously going to have a pretty big role this year as opposed to last year for a team that I think expects to be kind of in the finals mix again.
Speaking of incredibly likable players at Gonzaga, let's close out the show talking about Drew Timme, the other player here, of course, who participated in Summer League with the Sacramento Kings. We saw exactly what we know Drew Timme is good at in Summer League, and I think we also saw, unfortunately, the things that are holding him back from being somebody who sticks in the NBA. Like the 3-point shot wasn't really there, and I think that the better he shoots from 3, the more likely he is to make the NBA. Like it is a factor, but ultimately, for me at least, the defense is just not an area that is at the level it needs to be, both as a switchable defender. He's not going to be, he's probably going to be somebody you use in drop coverage, and doesn't have a lot of verticality. So he's not exactly going to be you can use Rudy Gobert in drop coverage because he can block a lot of shots, or Zach Edey, but Drew Timme's doesn't really fit that role either. So we didn't see tremendous improvement from him defensively, but he also was just coming off a foot injury that a lot of people didn't think would even result in him getting to play at full strength. And I love seeing him used differently offensively. I love seeing him be more away from the rim and being able to set screens and facilitate the offense, and kind of, a mini version of Domantas Sabonis offensively in terms of his ability to kind of facilitate an offense from the top of the key. But I can also see what is holding him back right now. I don't know how much, if you got a chance to talk to him or how much you saw him at Summer League, but that was kind of at least the impression that I got, was a lot of good things, but still some of those areas of concern are kind of still there for him right now.
Yeah, I had a chance to watch, I think, 2 or 3 of their games, the Sacramento games. I was also down there kind of following Isaac Jones from Washington State. So they both happened to be on the same team, so it was convenient to have them together. But regarding Drew, I think most people don't realize that his injury, the foot fracture he suffered during the G League season, was his first injury, not in college, not high school, ever. He had never missed a game, a practice because of an injury in his life. And he said it was kind of inevitable it was going to happen at some point in his career. He got hit down low, setting a screen, kind of fell on his foot the wrong way, and just collapsed and knew instantly that something was wrong. So His first injury, he mentioned that, it's never an ideal time to have an injury, but at least it happened while he was like on a contract, a two-way contract like he was. And he wasn't full-time on an NBA roster yet.
Mm-hmm.
He did mention that the Bucks had talked about kind of a 10-way or a 10-day contract. And he had been in conversations about that potentially happening or multiple 10-day contracts in the future. Obviously that never kind of materialized, and he had just been the next few months rehabbing, but still had a chance to play with the Kings in Summer League. Also had an offer from the Raptors, was kind of committed to the Raptors. Initially, the Kings wanted him to play in the California Classic, which is a week before Vegas Summer League. And so he did that. Really just felt comfortable playing with the Kings and wanted to kind of stay with them because he had developed chemistry with the players and the coaches. And so, and then, in Vegas played well. Like you mentioned, isn't still elite knockdown 3-point shooter. That at Gonzaga didn't really have the green light to do that at Gonzaga because of how effective he was down low. So I still think that is something that if he wants to stick on a roster, he's gonna have to make that a part of his game, and especially with the defensive kind of deficiencies he has too. He's got to really become a great offensive player, and we know what he can do in the post. And I still think he can score on almost anyone at the NBA level and find a role off the bench somewhere. And I think it is probably going to have to be a 2-way contract if that, but he gets another chance with the G League team and was playing pretty well toward the end of the G League season before he got hurt. I think was shooting the three a little bit better, not high volume, but was still shooting around 38% on the tries that he had, and had a few double doubles. And so I think he was kind of showing what he could do. He talked about feeling more comfortable and kind of comparing it to his freshman year at Gonzaga, where it took him a while to settle in. And I think he felt like he was doing that before the injury. And so I think he'll be at a better place when he starts off if he does get another G League opportunity or 2-way contract. And again, he'll have to kind of make the most of that, probably shoot the three at a higher level than we're used to, and at least be someone that they can't attack every possession on defense and kind of provide more production on that end of the floor too.
Theo, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come on the show to talk about your experiences in Las Vegas, hanging out with this team, talking about Mark Few, I should say. I really appreciate you taking the time. But folks, that is going to wrap it up for us today here on the Locked On Zags podcast. We're going to be back later this week with more Olympic coverage, more recruiting updates as we get them through, all sorts of fun stuff here. It is the middle of the offseason, but we're still rolling along here on Locked On Zags. So make sure you make this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Thanks again, folks. And until next time, as always, go Zags.